Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the Community CloudCast. My name is Eric Schups. I'm joined by my fellow host, Jason Himmelstein and Paul McCollum.
Hello.
With our special guest this week in a very bright orange outfit that you can see from outer space is Mr. Paul Schaeflein.
Hey, thanks for having me, fellas.
Hello, sir. Good to see you again. It's been so long.
Exactly.
Well, we hope everyone is having a good week. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on the social platform, whichever one you're using, YouTube or Facebook. We will address those as we go through the stream. For those of you who are watching afterwards, streams will post in real time, a few minutes after the broadcast is done. We do broadcast the third Thursday of every month. There's the link to the YouTube channel, and on Facebook, you can find us under Community CloudCast. And we even occasionally have good content, which hopefully have this week. I don't know what Paul's going to talk about. Hopefully it's good.
Yeah,
hey, Visual Studio's open. What could be wrong?
Here we go.
This is going to be fun. The admin in me is going to take a great nap, Paul. That's a great picture, man. Look at that.
I know. What did you get this professionally done? Edie insisted on this, didn't she?
No, this was Susie actually. So this is the official Eden 365 picture. So yeah.
Look at you.
Yeah.
It almost looks British even. Yeah.
But there you go.
It almost looks like Paul.
Base for radio. I keep saying.
Right. Well, as always, we have to thank our sponsors, Aptigent and Aptigent Power Tools. You can learn more at www.aptigent.com. And you can find Power Tools on your favorite platforms from Power Apps, Power Automate, Salesforce and Nintex, IBM BPM, and any other platform that allows external open API-based custom connectors. Also mentioned Share Cloud Summit coming up in Irving on September 28th. It will be the first live SharePoint event that we've had, or any type of event really here in the DFW area in a year and a half, almost 2 years now. There's another event shortly after that as well that Jason, I know you're going to be at. Which one is that?
That's SP Fest Dallas. Yeah, I'll be there. That one's the week, I want to say it's October 12th-ish, somewhere in there. I don't know the exact start date. I'll be there for part of it, though.
Yeah, a couple weeks after. Same location, I believe, in the Irving Convention Center.
Lots of good community stuff coming back to the Dallas area. It's really nice. Hopefully we'll get the rest of Texas kick-started soon, too. Yeah,
it's good. In fact, Jason and I were at an in-person event last week in Branson, Missouri, put on by our friend Mark Rackley. And we had it was good attendance. We had people on. It was a hybrid event. We had folks on Teams, and then all of us went out on the lake for the day. It was a great event, and it was great to be back doing stuff in person.
Yeah, it was really, really nice to get to interact with folks in this hybrid way. Like I was a little skeptical, to be honest with you, of how exactly it was going to come off. But man, it really went well because the folks in the room joined in the Teams conversation. We were able to, field questions that way very naturally, very smoothly. And it was just really very, very nice. I got to present with Adam Saxton for a full day workshop from the Guy in the Cube channel. We just had a blast, and the Power BI folks that were there, we had anywhere from 10 to 20 people between the hybrid and the in-person, just having a blast, getting questions answered and feeling like a community again. It was really nice.
Yeah, it was good. Very good. Speaking of Adam, we will have him on as a future guest.
There you go.
On here, we will twist his arm and get him one way or the other. All right, so moving into our content, because we know Paul will have quite a bit to share. And of course, we have our segments up front. So starting with Mr. McCollum, although I'm not sure Paul has much to share with us this week. Paul, what's on your mind?
No, just watching some of the developments, acquisitions that are going on out in the world. Some interesting ones in the Salesforce space, but I've been a little heads down lately, so I haven't been up watching news for a bit. So,
yeah, Paul and I were chatting before we came on the air here. As people know, Aptigent is my company, and we have tools on the Salesforce platform. So we get a lot of communication from Salesforce, a lot of communication from Salesforce. And I woke up this morning to an incident event that was followed by an invitation to a live webinar about the incident event, which I thought was curious. Can you imagine all the Microsoft folks having to jump on an Azure AD outage event, doing a Teams broadcast?
I'd be curious to see how exactly they get on during an Azure AD outage, but that's okay.
Here's a Zoom link. They could always fall back to and go
Live
old
meeting.
school, couldn't they? Live meeting. Skype. Everybody Skype.
There you go.
So,
That
but
may
I
be
thought
the-
that was an.
That may
Go
be
ahead,
the
Paul.
reason for the community Teams of edition as part of Windows 11, because that's the somewhat different auth provider.
There you go.
Slightly different, but I thought it was interesting to get incident, and then invitation to a broadcast to talk about the incident. That's a different way of approaching it. But Paul, why don't you share your thoughts on that? Because I thought it was pretty incisive.
Yeah, so I think this actually ended up being kind of a test run of a new. I don't think the outage or what big, but I think that it was something that went on long enough that they instituted their plan to get ahead of it and just start a communication channel that people could pop into, listen, and hang on every update. So if there's a widespread outage, they're not trying to hit multiple channels. They just, here's everything. We're inviting everybody directly to here so that people don't start their own watch parties or communications or reply to this Twitter feed or go here and do that. They just kind of proactively start their own if they think it's going to have enough gravity. I haven't heard anything as of today. Like I said, I think it was a narrow impact, and we just saw that bat signal go up as kind of a first of a breed to cover that. There was an outage. It's been more than a year now, I think, since the last big outage, but it was neat to see that plan and know what you can expect if there's any other challenges like that.
Yeah, I actually thought it was cool. If you think that's revenue impacting or a problem for you, you can jump on and listen to the update. So that was cool, kind of like having like an Azure channel, right? If there were a 24/7 Azure channel, if there's something went down, you could jump on and see what people are saying. Clever idea. I'm sure they could do that with Channel 9 or something, but then again, you have the attendant AAD problem. If AAD is down, which is often the case, when something goes down, it's usually AAD. How would you log in?
Yeah.
Right. Well, moving on to Jason's segment, where he has all sorts of updates for us this week. Jason, how about
it's all Microsoft stuff. It's all Power BI. So I threw a couple of these out here, knowing that Mr. Schaefline was going to be joining. I sort of went for more of the developer angle today for you, Paul, to try and keep it interesting for you. Something interesting that came up, this was something that got released 11 days ago, a new Angular component. So, for Power BI, so if you're building Angular web applications, right, you're able to embed Power BI reports and elements into your Angular app now. With a library that they've developed and first party, put it out there. You can get it through NPM or GitHub, and it allows you to embed visuals, tiles, Q&A, paginated reports, the whole 9 yards into an Angular web app, right? So if you're not sitting on a SharePoint stack or sitting on a Microsoft stack, and you don't want to go use the secure embed mechanism, this is yet another way that might be a little bit more performant for you developer folks to be able to implement some Power BI reporting directly into your Angular app, not React, Angular. So
now, from an authorization perspective, how does that work? Is it just for anonymous shared?
No,
report?
So if you're doing anonymous, then obviously that's going to work. But because of the way that Power BI works, it's going to ask you for auth if, in fact, it's requiring a license. So if you're sharing something that requires that authentication, it's going to patch through and say, hey, click this button, sign in, and it's going to do that pop up for you. Haven't tried it yet personally because, well, not a developer. That's you and Paul. That's your world. But and this just came out. So, but that's my understanding of the way this is supposed to work, based upon the release notes as well. So that was thing one. Thing two, a little bit less developer-y, but still, I personally think is important. Is this the ability to use single sign-on with Azure Active Directory through the on-premises data gateway. I still call it the on-premises data gateway because that was the name of the thing before. Now we just call it the data gateway. But the idea behind this is being able to reach back to on-premises data sources, leveraging Azure Active Directory, because nowadays a lot of our modern servers are Azure AD connected as opposed to on-prem domain connected, because a lot of stuff living in Azure or living in GCP or AWS or wherever, but still leveraging Azure Active Directory for the server login, the server backend, and all of that. So now being able to go through an on-premises data gateway to be able to reach that, as well as being able to leverage things that use Azure AD, such as Snowflake or other things of that nature. We have the ability to now do SSO through this data gateway and be able to talk natively through the single sign-on mechanism for Azure Active Directory. So
that's good. That
really
was a big
good
stumbling
stuff.
block.
Yeah. So this is something you have to go turn on in the settings. And in this blog article that I've linked to, gives you sort of a guided walkthrough of exactly how to do it. It's not difficult. It's a single toggle, and you're on. So. In addition, this month we have, they released early. This is really weird for Microsoft. The Power BI team has been releasing the third week of the month for the past couple of months. They had stuff ready to go early. So Power BI August 2021 feature summary came out. Alongside of that, we always get the new Power BI desktop. And the Power BI desktop this month, well, you'd look at it and go, wow, that feels a little bit light. There's some huge stuff in here, and I've highlighted a couple of them, that were important to me. This custom shape formatting, to me, this is a really huge thing. Be able to reformat your shapes, bind them, change the colors. This is heading towards the ability to do some of this data-bound type of stuff that I'm looking forward to, where I'll be able to say, hey, take the shape and data bind it to a KPI sitting in the back end, right? Tell me, are we up? Are we down? Make it red if we're in a bad spot. Make it green if we're in a good spot, and truly drive those visual KPI type of things. Now, this isn't there, but this is where we need to head in order for that to happen. So go ahead and take a look at this if that's of interest to you, because that's the direction that this should be heading. They've changed the shapes quite a bit. They've added a ton of new shapes that are native, but now you can actually just modify them, make them the way you want them, reshape them, resize them. It's really cool. The next one here that I'm highlighting is about shared synonyms. Now, Q&A synonyms, this is, if you go in and you build out your synonyms for a data set, right? And you want to be able to let people ask questions in a native language, the native language model. And you realize, wow, lots of people are choosing to ask about this, ask it this way instead of that way. I can go in and add a synonym to that term so that it will populate in the right way. Well, when you build it for one data set, you realize, wow, this is something that I really need corporate-wide, because those are synonyms that everybody's using. Instead of calling it this, we're calling it that. We can now set shared synonyms across multiple data sets. So this blog post really does walk you through how all of that works. And it's really nice, because if you're doing that, I build a lot of stuff that I need to keep separated. From a security perspective, I publish in Power BI into different workspaces, different apps. And I need for somebody to, I need to keep people out of the other stuff, but I want to be able to publish these Q&A synonyms every once in a while, because sometimes we use them, sometimes we don't. But now I can. So this is that crossing the boundary with the synonyms is really nice, rather than having to go sidecar and say, I'm going to copy it from here and paste it over here and have to go through all of that. I can just say, I want to go to the repository. I want to pick which ones I want, and off to the races I go. The next one here is the one data flow connector. So if you've ever used data flows in Power BI, you will know that there were multiple data flow connectors, and especially with last month, we got a brand new one. That one is the one that is moving forward. All of the other ones, the data platform data connector versus the data flow connector, it got kind of confusing. And there were limitations to the old one. Now what they're saying is that this is the one that everybody's going to use, whether you're data platform, which traditionally means Power Automate and Power Apps as opposed to Power BI. It's all going to be one. So that's a very nice thing. The next one here is, again, more of a developer-y kind of a thing. This is the Power BI REST API support for DAX queries. So if you are a developer and you like to go off and make calls against the REST API, you're now going to be able to do that and make DAX queries directly against the REST API, programmatically pulling things back and working with that data directly coming out of that REST API. This is something that in order to work with, you have to turn on the XMLA endpoint in the admin settings under integration settings. And so it's the XMLA endpoint, and Analyze in Excel has to be turned on. So lots of folks already have this turned on. This is not a premium feature, however. This is something that works in Pro as well. It's just the read access for it at the XMLA endpoint. And the last one I'm going to highlight is something that was really important to me personally, is a detailed historical activity information for premium data sets where we actually can get down to not quite real time, but we're seeing longer term and more frequent basis. We can now send data out to Azure Log Analytics. And I don't remember the exact metric, but I think it was every 30 minutes this was refreshing as opposed to once a day. So you're able to see things a lot faster. Again, this is premium. So this is talking about the premium per capacity backed data sets and workspaces. So you have to take a look into that. And you do have to connect up to an Azure workspace for log analytics if you're going to go off and keep these things around for the 2 years. The next slide here, Eric, talks about the Forrester Wave report just came out. As per usual, Microsoft is way out ahead of everybody else. Big bragging point for them. Happy for them. Tells me I've chosen the right horse to bind my career to. So that works for me.
Is this for business intelligence utilities or services, or what's this for?
So this was all around the BI stack. So I did not throw the link in here, but there is a whole thing that Arun came out and posted specifically that Microsoft named a leader in the Forrester Wave augmented BI platforms. So yeah, it's all about the BI platforms and the BI space. So that's what that's all about. The last slide here was something I found on the web this week that I thought was really interesting. I think this got tweeted and got picked up by a bunch of different folks. The top 5 picks for these Excel, Power Query, and Power BI. I didn't quite agree with the Power BI one, so I wrote my own. But I just thought it was kind of a cool thing. Like, what are the reasons why you would use one tool versus another, right? And the Power BI ones really didn't resonate quite as much with me. So these other ones, and I was talking more about the Power BI service. This was talking kind of about Power BI desktop. So I thought it was a neat thing. We all love Venn diagrams, right? So I figured, why not throw in a Venn diagram for the day? So that's what I have, Eric. That's the news from the Power BI space in the past couple of weeks. And you can check out the Bifocal podcast at bifocal.show if you want to hear more from me and John White on a weekly basis about what's going on there as well.
Awesome. We need to start putting links for the Bifocal show in here.
That might be helpful.
Get that done. And for everyone watching, we will post the links to all the information that Jason referenced in the comments, and we will also put them in the description of the YouTube video once it goes live for people watching afterwards. You can go there to view all of the links. Good stuff, Jason. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I only have something very quick to share, and then we'll move on to Paul's presentation. This is something that the Power Platform Connector team has been talking about for a little while, originally under the guise of being a script step. It's now called the code step, so that you can inject custom code into your connector process. There's a new step actually in the wizard that I'll show you here when you create a new custom connector. Now, step 4 used to be test. Now it's called code. And you can jump in here and you get this little Visual Studio type wizard here that you can go in and start adding code. The idea here is that whereas before we had policy templates that you could add to change things, they were limited to certain, categories of what those templates could do, and you can only do what was available out of the box. Now with the code mechanism, you can do whatever you want. So if you need to change your queries as they're going out of the system, do some pre-flight processing, data manipulation, reformatting, say, of a JSON object, for example, if you're writing a connection to a third-party system that you don't control, and you need to manipulate the data object before it gets sent off to that system, you can do it now right here in the code step. There's some good documentation on this on the custom connectors documentation site. In fact, the page has been up for a little while, but the feature just released. In fact, when I was doing my demos for NACS last weekend, I had to put a little code, a little cheater code in there to make it work. And then when I got to finally doing my demo on Tuesday, voila, it just showed up. So it should be there for everybody depending on your release ring that you're on, and you can take advantage of those in your custom connectors. A couple of things that you do need to be aware of. These happen before a policy template. So if you already have policy templates in place and you plan to replicate or change that functionality, be aware that this happens. Code gets executed before the policy template in order of precedence. The total code file has to be less than a meg that you create. Execution time has to happen in under 5 seconds. So if you're calling out to an external service to do something, or running some operation that fetches data, be aware of that processing limit that you have to stay under. There's no logging it for the moment, unfortunately. That is something they're talking about for the future. And you can only have one script per connector. So everything that needs to happen would have to happen in that script. So if you're using it for multiple action endpoints, you'd have to figure out how to manipulate the action endpoint that's coming in order to work with your code connector. But you can apply it to specific endpoints in your connector. So when you enable the code and you apply it, there's an option here where you can add it to specific endpoints. So this is just a demo that I did, but if you have multiple endpoints, you can add to a specific endpoint here. So that's a new feature that they just released. I think a lot of people building custom connectors will take advantage of. So with that said, those are our segments up front. Now we can get to what you really came for, and here's just a little quick code sample with a link. I'll also post that link as well of what you can do with those connectors. So with all that out of the way, we will now get to our featured presentation from Mr. Paul Schaeflein, and I have absolutely no idea what he's going to talk about. So this, folks, should be interesting. Paul, take it away, my friend.
Well, thank you. Surprisingly, I'm not going to talk about authentication. So yeah, I know, who'd have thunk. So what I want to talk a little bit about is the a library that I worked on to help folks who are transitioning to the Microsoft Graph from SharePoint, and so we start out with things that Microsoft Graph obviously does a lot of stuff in Exchange. That's where it started, and it does a lot of services. The team's workload has been on the graphs since day one, but the SharePoint and OneDrive hasn't always been there. And some struggles that I ran into in the case of, let's say I want to get information about Microsoft SharePoint sites. So I can use the Graph Explorer and go to my sites endpoint. And what you'll see is I get information about the site. But that's really, there's not much. I get just a host name. I mean, what is that? And to drill down into that, I get things that have been exposed through Microsoft Graph, but it's not necessarily everything that I care about. Whereas what I can get from the SharePoint CSOM is much more rich, right, with that legacy data. So how do I get that? And so what the approach that I tried to take of is, the Microsoft Graph SDK for .NET has this fluent style where if I wanted to see that information here, I can actually, let me show you how this looks in the code snippet. So if I'm in the C# code snippet, you can see I create a graph service client, and then it's .sites and .root. Or if I wanted to let me just get like me/mail, you'll see this style of what's happening here is that it builds this what we call a fluent style. So here's me.request.select mail, and so this is a definite approach that has been made by the Graph SDK team, Microsoft Graph SDK team. This is how they want to write or consumers to consume the code. If you think back to the days of CSOM, it doesn't work that way. I had to create a load statement and pass in a Lambda statement of the things I wanted to load. Then I had to do the execute, make sure my context was set up ahead of time. It's much different than just making a REST call or a C#, fluent style, if you will. And so to try to bridge these two things together, we came up with this community library. And I say we, I really mean myself. So the Graph SDK community extension library is designed to do a similar type of thing. And what this is the GitHub repo. There's two branches that you care about. The V4 just came out this week from Microsoft, so there's V3, V4, depending on which native SDK you're doing. But the idea here is that we're extending the Graph SDK for .NET. So you have to have that installed, and on top of that, you're laying on these other things. And what was provided are a bunch of builders for SharePointy things to start with, right? And so if I look about this, typical things things that I've run into that needed to be done. So site scripts and site designs. There's a REST endpoint in SharePoint, but again, you have to have the SharePoint context and so on and so forth. And so why not put that into something that looks just like the graph, right? Changelog. This doesn't get used as much more now with the Delta queries that you can get in Microsoft Graph, but back in the day in SharePoint, and still, if you have that code, you want to get the changelog in SharePoint that's there. Updating navigation on a site. This is still a popular request among everyone I deal with who's working in SharePoint. I need to update the navigation. How do I do that in Graph? There's nothing there as well. A couple things I want to dig into today in depth there, site users and site groups. Despite the best efforts of everyone involved, or if I create a team or I create a team-connected site, then the site membership is controlled by an Azure Active Directory group. But if I'm in a communication site, or if folks really aren't paying attention, it's not very difficult to end up adding users to a SharePoint group. And how do I get that information? It's not in Azure Active Directory, so it's not on Graph. How do I get that? There's a search endpoint. This is SharePoint Search. Now, in Microsoft Graph, the search connectors and the search UI is coming. There's great stuff on there. But again, SharePoint Search is a different beast, if you will, so you can call into that. And then a couple other things there that are somewhat interested. So that's the idea around this, is that, hey, I want to just use this code so that I can, I have my AS or my .NET code, and I don't want to have to install the CSOM. I don't want to have two different code styles. So that's the goal here. So I'm going to switch over to a project that I have here. And so just to show you what's happening, they'll do getting SharePoint site groups. And boom, the first thing you'll see here is it prompts me to log in, right? And so this is all part of the Graph SDK to say I want to log in and get an account. So it can prompt in and do the interactive account. Notice I'm in a console app. It launches the default browser for me. The authentication is complete. It just works. And then you'll see it went through and it actually did show us some information back. Where did that come from? Well, that's in my site. So I'll go into SharePoint. If I go into the SharePoint permissions, and you can see here in the site owners group, there's me and there's Al. And so that's the information that we can pull out of, again, under the covers, we're hitting the CSOM, right? Well, what does that mean under the covers, right? So I'm going to, all these samples that I have included in here end up doing what we call logging, and I'll show you a lot of in-depth logging. But just looking at this real quick, you can see under the covers what's happening is it's making a call to, well, here's notice it's _ API, right? So this would look familiar to folks who have used SharePoint in the past. I'm making a call to _ API to site groups, and I'm expanding this information. And the data then comes back just as we'd expect. It's a big JSON stream. And then, of course, we're parsing that into objects that we can dump into. And so the goal here, this whole thing, is to say, okay, you're making a request, and I want to convert that to SharePoint. So I'm going to stop the project here, and we'll take a look at what this code looks like, right? If you've done anything in the SDK, this will look somewhat familiar. First of all, I'm going to get a token credential. This is the new Azure.identity way to connect. See, I said I wasn't going to talk about authentication, but I'm going to anyways. Yeah. But the idea, of course, here is I can create a token credential as part of the Azure.identity SDK and get it. So what I'm doing here is saying the shared token credential cache, use the Visual Studio credential or the interactive browser credential. when I ran, you'll notice it popped up a browser window, because when I'm logged in Visual Studio under these accounts, I'm not logged into the same account that I'm trying to hit, right? Because I don't, it's a throwaway developer tenant that I've got from Microsoft, so I'm going to connect, but it works just like you'd expect that to do. And then down here is where I make these calls, right? So typically you would want to just do, we had graph service client.me to get my stuff, right? So there's a new request builder called the Sharepoint API that then switches over to that underscore API bit. And now it's just like you'd expect, underscore API /web/groups. I can do expand. I want to include the users of the group. I want to expand the owner group, right? And I'm passing in the scopes, which is the SharePointy thing, right? It looks and feels just like Graph SDK that you would expect, right? And so a couple of key things that you have to understand, right? So in the past, if I'm doing something that is going to just, well, here, so I'll switch over to a different sample here, this diagnostic sample that'll show that. So if I'm going to do /me, right? So you can see here to get the scope to read information about the current user is user.read, and it's my graph.microsoft.com. I know what that scope is. In fact, I could leave off the graph.microsoft.com bit and it'll work with just saying user.read. But when I'm calling into SharePoint, I have to have the SharePoint hostname. Now before you could put in really any SharePoint domain and it would work, but they fixed that loophole a while back. So I need to then be providing a scope that's going to have my SharePoint hostname with the appropriate scope. And so there's still some information you have to do here. And what I'm doing here, leveraging, is the ability to say this with scopes. And this is a method that's provided in later versions of the Graph SDK to say, on this request, I'm going to have a scope. I could set it, if it's the same scopes all the time, or if you're doing app only and it's just a .default scope, you can do that back when you create the token credential. But for now, I just do this on each individual call. And the idea here is, again, is just to say, I'm running the graph service client. I want to call into SharePoint. And when I call into SharePoint, I want it to look like everything else. And so this is what we got here. Now, the logging is another thing I want to talk about, right? There's a lot of things going on here. So I'm using Azure.identity to connect using the token credential. We've got the library, or you're using the MCell library. You don't have to use token credentials. You can still do an auth provider of your own making using the MCell library. The graph.community library is here as well. So all this stuff is doing stuff, and there's a bunch of logging that has to happen. So another part of what the community library is doing, and this is really just started as a playground for me to figure out what's going on. In this diagnostic sample, there's a bunch of stuff that's set up ahead of time to do that. And so we'll walk through these, and the goal here is, if you need to understand what's happening under the covers in your code, drop your graph query. You can go into Graph Explorer, grab that snippet, drop it in here, and then you see it running. So first of all, we're just creating an HTTP message logger. And the idea around this is it's going to take the request and response and hide all the important bits like authentication tokens and strip out stuff you don't care about, and just show you the request and the response as text, as if you were looking at it on the wire. Then it's going to set up a listener for the MCell library. Now, if you remember, I was doing the token credential, so I'm not using MCell. It's happening for me as part of the Azure bits. But I can set up a delegate that will then receive logs from the MCell library and write that out. See, again, I'm putting it into the same logger. It's basically a string builder under the covers, right? And then there's another set of listeners. It's the Azure Event Source Listener. Now, this is really down in the depths of Windows bits. So if you've been coding for a while, you know there's the event logs and so on. An Event Source Listener is just every SDK written by the Azure team is pumping messages into this Event Source Listener, and you can create a delegate that says, hey, I want to get those messages. And this is just a fancy land that's basically taking their bunch of stuff and putting it into a string so that we can look at it. The idea, of course, here is that we're logging with the prefix of AZ any message issued by the Azure SDKs. In my example, the Azure SDK that we care about is the token credential. And then I use the same pattern to do a graph listener for the community project. However, I don't log anything interesting at the moment, but again, it's just as a demo to see it's in there. So all this stuff is set up into this logger that we've created. And then later on down here, you'll notice I'm going to do this client factory, and we'll talk more about what that does in a bit. But that logger is passed into this to get my graph service client, and then the two calls are made, right? So, well, let's run again here, and we'll do the diagnostics, and the log is going to be much more in depth, as you'll see. And so we run that. It's going to make me log in again because I closed my browser session, right? And so we'll do the login. Again, the caching can happen if you need it. Again, this is just demo code. All right. And so now if I go back to here, eventually, so I ran a count to the app tiles on a site. I ran a count to get me, and then we're at the log. So if I go to the breakpoint here, let's look at the log. And this is going to be much larger. I'll do this full screen. So the COMM, that's the graph service library. I'm just recording that you're making a call to the app server, the app tile collection. Then there's a couple entries from a bunch of entries from Azure, and this is where it starts to get interesting, right? So first of all, it's coming through and it said that the Azure token credential found 0 accounts. So it needs to get a token. There's none there to begin with. And the first one that I said was use the shared token credential cache. Well, the shared token credential cache said there is no credential available. There's nothing in the cache. So I can't use that one. We're going to move on. The next one was the Visual Studio credential. It was unable to receive an access token. Why? I can look at the details and see what's going on here, but basically the account was not found in that tenant. Well, remember, I've logged into Visual Studio with my work account and I'm connecting to a demo tenant, so that didn't work. So we go on to the next one. So that's where we end up into the interactive browser credential, and that one, we saw that work. So by hooking up this event source listener for the Azure SDK, I can see what's happening in my token credential, the token acquisition, find out what's working, what's not working. Because I did this, I originally had the Azure CLI credential in there, and that was throwing an exception. So there's on my to-do list to go log a bug. So instead of failing silently and letting the next one pick up like these are, the Azure CLI credentials is throwing an exception, which is aborting the whole process. So we can see that by doing this. So again, if you want to find out what's going on, this is one way to do that. All right, so there are a bunch of stuff here that's happening with that browser credential, right? So we don't care about this, it just works. So I'm just gonna zoom past all that, right? And there's the scopes, right? Now I get further on down, all the way past. No. So what's interesting here is this scope. Let me talk about this a little bit. So I showed you in the code that I set the scope, and I made that with scopes on the call to the Microsoft Graph Service Client. The Graph Service Client is what invokes the token credential, which invokes the interactive browser. So that, again, my code doesn't have to do any of this work to do authentication. I just set up the token credentials and said, hey, you go figure it out. All that worked for me. Under the covers, Azure is running the MSAL we'd expect. There you go. It ended up getting an authentication. So here we go. An authorization code was received. It exchanged that for a token. And even further down, you'll see that it actually fetched the token from the host and it put that in a cache. And I'll show you, I still have my running, so I can run another token in a bit without logging in. All right. Now, finally, we get down here to something. This is that logging required that I talk about that does the get and the request and response logging. This is the call that is end up being made to the service, right? So that SharePoint API dot whatever is translated to a URL, and you notice it, including the user agent and stuff like that. I'll talk about that. Here's the response, and see the big chunk of response, right? And the round trip, boom. And then it made a second call, right? So if you remember in the code, first it was getting the app tiles from a specific site, and then it was getting /me. So now it moves on to the second one here, and the shared token credential, right? Same kind of stuff, boom, it can't get the shared credential because the shared token credential doesn't use the browser one, that's all the other ones. But at the end of the day, what ends up happening is that an acquired token silent is happening, and the acquired token silent is going to find, if we get in here, it is going to find, I'm not seeing it, here we go. So, oh, I'm sorry, take that back. It called the interactive browser credential, but remember, it's interactive browser. I'm still logged on, it's the same session. It just automatically happens. So remember, I logged in once, but I made 2 calls. So I get a second token. This comes back, and then I do my second request, which is here to say get /me, and it returns the information about me. So moral of the story is, if you need to see what's happening, either your custom requests using the community library or the built-in requests that the graphics is making, the logging options will then show you the whole thing that's going on. You can troubleshoot what's happening. Perhaps the serialization isn't the way you want, or you want to see something that's going on, boom, we can do it here. That's the whole goal of this. So let me finish on.
Well, I think it's important to point out that SharePoint isn't always giving you what you expect. We've long dealt with this, especially with the CSOM, right?
Yeah,
yes. You may be asking for something that requires, say, it to go out and query the database. So it's only going to send you summary data and not the full data. And you never really know that. In the CSOM days, you would get something back that say, you asked for something that doesn't exist. What did I ask for? Right? And so it's extremely helpful to not have to be in Fiddler all the time, trying to see stuff going back and forth to find that piece of information that's in the JSON, if you can just see it.
Or if you're a networking idiot like me, you can't get Fiddler to decrypt the SSL traffic without stupid errors.
Yeah, so that too.
Thanks. Yeah, and now I do want to point out though, right, that under the covers, everything here is REST. It's not CSOM at all, right? So everything's mixed. So it has to be exposed as part of a SharePoint REST API in order for this to work at all. Now, if you want to dig into what the client.svc is, you could probably make it work, but I didn't do that, right? Okay, so that is, and just to show you now, I'm going to run another, I still have the program running, so I'm going to run another response, and wait a minute, why is it prompting me to log in, right? And so what I asked for now was the sites. I ran it one saying I want SharePoint things, and I want me. And now I'm asking for the /root/sites. Well, that's not consented. So before the call, I removed all consent to the app. And so because I'm asking a scope that hasn't been consented, I'm going to then be prompted. So because I'm using the token credential bits that the Microsoft Graph SDK supports, and because the token credential supports incremental consent, I get it for free, right? Who doesn't love free stuff? Now that works, authentication is completed, and if we come back, and then I get the site is just a communication site with a title. So that's how the authentication bits are all going to work. All right. Now, a couple other things to wrap up I want to talk about. So I wanted to create my graph service client. And so I did that with there's a factory method as part of the community library that will do that. And this community library has a couple of different overloads, as you'd expect on the factory method. And so you can either pass in a token credential or an authentication provider, as you'd expect. And then you can actually pass in a logger, or again, with a token credential, and so on. The idea here, of course, here is that I don't have to worry about all the things that have to happen. If I do new graph service client, there's things that have to happen, but what I want to do is some custom handlers. One is the logging, and the other one is the SharePoint one, which we'll talk about in a second. And so because there's common things happening, I put that into a factory method, and then I can just make a simple call to say graph service client.create and pass in, right? So I'm just passing in my logger, I'm passing in the token credential, and off we go. The other thing that it does, right? So in the factory method, no matter which one you call, it ends up building something using the SharePoint service handler, and the SharePoint service handler has two main capabilities that we care about here. Well, it's probably hard to see it in the code. So number one, it'll do the user agent header that says I'm an ISV or I'm not an ISV, which will help reduce your risk of being throttled. So it's a kind of a gray area as to what gets throttled, what gets not, but Microsoft has said you should decorate your traffic. And if I closed the window, but in the logs, you would have seen that there's a request header that said this is ISV or not ISV based on what's going on here. So let me do a quick to show you that. User agent. Well, of course, I can't find it because I'm running out of time and I'm trying to hurry. So that's number one. Number two is that when you make a call to Microsoft Graph and something fails, you get a specific error, in a shape. And if you call SharePoint and something goes wrong, God knows what kind of shape it's going to be in. So the goal of this handler is to, if something goes wrong, the idea here is to try to reformat that and make it so that it looks in something common that would be interesting here. So
wait. You mean common objects with common properties that we can handle in our code gracefully? What are you talking about, Paul?
I'm not believing any of these lies.
That's why you'll never be on the product team.
So I'm not sure what I did. I might have broken that in my race to make the v4 stuff ready. So, but here it is here. Yeah. So I'll have to fix this. So the next preview version of the v4 library will have this code working. But the idea, of course, is that we're getting the error from SharePoint and trying to make sense of it, put it in something you can go here. And so those are the two main things that were happening here. Is again the user agent, and then the error handling, right? So let me get into my options class here real quick and show you that. The idea here, oh, that's not the one I want. Oh, so let me go back to.
Paul, you're doing just fine on time, buddy. So
yeah, you
okay.
got plenty of time, bro.
Okay, so the idea here is I'm creating this options class, and I'm saying the user agent is this diagnostic sample. There's other things I can pass in here, right? And so the other one is I could say the user. Let me show this real quick here, user agent. See, so here's the SharePoint throttling declaration is what I can pass in here. And the idea here is that I can then say ISV, yes or no, and then the company name and the application name app version. So this is this is that the declaration that goes into a head of the request header, and I'll show you that when we're done here. But if that's something you need. Now, obviously, sending that to Microsoft Graph endpoint doesn't matter. Doesn't break, doesn't work, so boom. So again, using the SharePoint handler, well, if you use the community graph client factory, you get the handler, you can set this information, and in theory, you'll run into less issue there. So I mean,
it wasn't the original intent of that. I don't know if they ever actually put this into practice, is to show on the throttling page the cause of the throttling condition, right? And if it's a specific vendor or not. I don't know if that's ever actually been implemented, but I thought that was the reason they put that there.
Yes, and there is the throttling information in the headers, and we'll go back to the logs to show that. But I have never run into the throttling issue, and here's why. Built into the Microsoft Graph service client is a handler that will automatically retry on 429 responses. So you know what? If it might have been throttled, I don't know, because the code that I'm building on top of does it for me automatically. And I know that some of the PnP stuff does a similar thing, and they'll do the retry handling as well. But again, obviously my code, I don't have to write code to deal with the throttling. If it's happening, it's just, it might be slower. So
sure.
All right. So to your point, then we'll look at the graph one on a SharePointy thing again. I meant to show you those headers, and I totally forgot. And so we'll do the site group one again, which gives me just a SharePoint response. And so looking at the log, and you'll see here's the user agent header, right? And so again, this is coded. This is the sample, so it's just a made-up name here. With this would be the I'm using this as more like the company name, and it's a non-ISV, and then this is the library, and then the version, obviously 1.0 because it's in my build one. But that's the idea here, is that, and then coming back from SharePoint, health score, which is 2, don't know what that means. And then there was other SharePointy things. I'm not seeing it now, but when there's throttling and happening, there's another type of response header, which it's on my list to get to, put it into the handler, but the information's here, right? And so, and I'm not sure, Eric, if you remember what that header is that says you've been throttled, or what the throttling response
I don't remember off the top of my head. I have it in a code sample somewhere.
Yeah, and so call to action for all our listeners, go to the website. I should open that up as well. So obviously an issue on the library, that stuff would be great to be able to handle. Now that we have this handler in place to do that, it certainly would be helpful to have that in here as well. And so a couple other things I would say at the bottom I've listed. So originally I said, do you care about SharePoint user profile? We could add those in here. I don't think that's the case now, since profile is moving to Microsoft Graph. And the Hub Sites API, which could be interesting, but again, an opportunity for folks to do that. And then a couple other things that have come up in over the life of this. Inside this project is a web object and a list object that are not quite the same as what you'd get from SharePoint, and that's on purpose, right? And so what I decided to do is, when I'm making a call to a website, for example, the only things that I'm really worried about are like the change token and the groups, right? So there's a bunch of information available at the web object, and under the covers, it's making a call to _API/web. So the entire CSOM web object is kind of available, but I just didn't go through and do the deserialization of that, because you could get that from /sites/whatever, right? And so there's a little overlap between graph, and Paul's opinion is move to the graph unless you can't. And so again, if you stumble upon this recording and want to know what's going on there, why these properties aren't necessarily there, that would be why. Under the covers, they're in a thing called additional properties, so you can pull them out, or obviously you could submit a PR and do that, but I don't want to write a jillion lines of code just to deserialize properties that are available elsewhere. So okay, then the last thing on the samples, in the same repository, there's a samples thing, and it's set up purposely with the modern .NET Core stuff. So I'm really going to lose Jason on this stuff here, right? And so it sets up with the generic host, which then uses the dependency injection plan. So in my experience, folks really are using web API or web browser requests and have all that stuff in a console app. It's kind of hard to translate between the two. So this way, you could see those patterns. They're all set up in here. It's reading configuration from app settings like you'd expect, and then it runs what they call a hosted service, this menu service, and this is really just what you'd expect to see in a console app, where we're doing write line and read key and branching and making a call to say, hey, give me the class that backs this request that I do, and then run it. So a little information if you've been around in .NET back in the framework days and now you're trying to figure out how this all works going forward. Hopefully this stuff can be helpful in there as well. And with that, I think I covered all the interesting bits, the middleware, the extensions. Oh yeah, there are a couple other things. I just last want to point out is like this one, there's an extension. So there is a bit, wrong one here. There is a, I noticed that people are having trouble how to add an owner to a group using just plain old graph stuff. There's a specific thing you have to actually do the owners.odata bind property, which is a little bit different from stuff. So as I see these things, I throw them in here as an extension method. So now if you want to add an owner to a group, you can just do it as part of the request. You don't have to remember that this. And in fact, it's on my list. Someone just posted an issue that said, hey, I issued the delete command. I thought I was deleting a user from a group, but I deleted the whole group. Well, because they forgot the /reference bit of the URI segment. How is everyone going to remember that, right? So great thing. So if you have ideas about stuff that you struggle with, I want to help others. That's great stuff to put in this community library as well. And with that, I'll wrap it up. I don't know if anything came in comment question-wise, but oh, and I should show, if you do want to get a hold of me, I have a blog site, shapefine.net. There's all kinds of stuff about me, and you can hear me rattle on every week with the podcast with Jeremy Thake, the Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast, where we don't talk so much about old legacy CSOM stuff. We talk about new and improved stuff. So there you go. So thanks for having me.
Well, and occasionally he has me on to talk about the old stuff.
I think you're due to come back, right? We should look at the calendar.
It's been a while. It's been a while. Actually, it was a year ago, I think, last summer.
We were in person. I don't know where we were, but
no, we talked about custom connectors.
Oh, that's right. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. Before that, we were in Orlando, in person at VS Live. Was it?
Could be. Yeah. Could be.
Good,
yeah,
good
there we go. Here we go. Yeah. So
there it is.
There's one of those with me on there too. But that was before you, Paul. That was when Rich Diz was doing it.
Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah. Your partner John has been on a couple times as well. So you want to talk dev stuff? I'll have you back on, Jace.
yeah. Let's see how well that goes.
Yeah.
Jason will be all over it. All right. Really good stuff, Paul. Thank you for going through all of that with us. And we will post in the description a link to that GitHub repo as well. I'm sure, Paul, who else is maintaining that with you, or is that just all you?
Just all me. Just all me.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, you need some help, folks.
It does. Well, put it this way: the stuff that's in there is stuff that I ran into. If it doesn't help you, speak up, and we'll get that done.
Better yet, submit a PR.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Community. Go and get some stuff done. Great. That's really good stuff. Appreciate you putting that out there for everybody to use. And like I said, we'll get that link up for everyone. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this week's episode. before I mention our sponsors to close out, flip it back to Paul McCollum and Jason Himmelstein. Any other comments to close out this episode?
No, that was good. Like, I actually followed a good portion, like a solid 30%. A solid 30%.
I was going to say 30 seconds.
Yeah,
No,
me
like-
too. I understood all of it and really miss doing graph development.
I'm sure you didn't understand because I'm doing that Yankee accent instead of the good old Texan stuff. So
Yeah, good stuff, Paul. Thank you very much for that.
Paul,
man. We really
McCollum
appreciate it.
writes
great.
plenty of code. Don't let him fool you. He just does it on a different platform.
It's all of the platforms, and none of it is good. So it's I'm a bilingual illiterate.
So
Nice.
let's again thank our sponsors, Aptigent, www.aptigent.com, the ShareCloud Summit coming up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area on September 28th, followed by the SP Fest event in October, which I think you're right, Jason. It's like the 12th, 13th, 14th or something. During the show, I have to hoof out for the UK. Hopefully they'll let me.
Yeah, it's the 11th to the 15th.
That's right. That's right. So those are events coming up here in the DFW area. There are lots of other events going on, of course, just because we're based here in Texas. We're mentioning those events, but there was just an SP Fest event up where Mr. Schäflein is from in the Chicago area. Events are starting to come back, so check all of your regular channels.
I believe we're 101 days away from ECS as well, Eric.
Boy, aren't we, Justin? I am so looking forward to that. For those of you not familiar, I will update this deck with a few other things next week, but we also include collabsummit.eu, which is the European Collaboration Summit coming up. And that was obviously our alarm that Eric's talking too long. Coming up in Dusseldorf, Germany at the end of November. In fact, Jason and I are both hoofing it out of here just after Thanksgiving with a turkey leg in our hand running for the airport to head off to Dusseldorf for what is going to be the community event of the year. We are really looking forward to that one. Just because you're here in the States doesn't mean you can't attend, by the way. Hop on a plane to Dusseldorf and come join us. You can fly directly into Frankfurt and then catch a train or a puddle jumper up to Dusseldorf. It's going to be a great week. Highly recommend that you join us there if at all possible. We'd really love to see you there. We will share a beer with you, some sausage, and various other German accoutrements. And we'll be having a great time there. So looking forward to that. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this month. We will be back next month in September with another episode of the Community CloudCast. Thank you all. See you next time.
Thank you. See y'all.